I was just resetting his old laptop. Then I saw an email subject that felt wrong. Divorce decree final. I actually laughed and said, "Since when were you married?" He went quiet. But the photos didn't lie. A wedding. A life. A woman I'd never heard of. And the truth was, my marriage didn't start with a secret. It started with a man who decided I didn't need the whole story. I wasn't snooping. I need to say that because I still catch myself wondering if this somehow started with me doing something wrong. Like if I had just logged out, none of this would have happened. We would still be normal. Or at least, I would still think we were. But I wasn't digging. I was trying to reset the laptop. Stephen had left it on the dining table for almost a week. Every time I asked him about it, he'd shrug and say, "Just wipe it. I don't need anything on there." It felt like one of those small, practical things you do without thinking too much. Clear space. Pass it on. Move forward. My niece Amy needed it. Patricia, my younger sister, had mentioned a few days before that Amy's old device kept freezing during online assignments. Patricia teaches elementary school, so she's always juggling things, always trying to stretch what she has. When Stephen offered the laptop, it felt like a simple, kind gesture. So I sat down with it that afternoon, expecting it to take maybe 20 minutes. It didn't reset. It opened. Straight into his desktop like I'd just stepped into a room I wasn't supposed to be in, except the door was already unlocked. His email was open. There were hundreds of unread messages stacked in the inbox. Promotions, work stuff, newsletters. Nothing out of the ordinary. I wasn't planning to scroll. I was already reaching for the settings when one subject line caught my attention. Final divorce decree, reviewed and filed. I paused. I read it again. Then again, slower this time, like maybe I'd misunderstood the words the first time around. Divorce. Decree. Final. At first, I honestly thought it was spam. Stephen gets those random legal-looking emails sometimes, and we usually laugh about them. But this one looked different. Cleaner. Official. Then I saw the name. His full name. Stephen Carter. Middle name included. The version he only uses for documents that actually matter. And something in my chest dropped. Not a sharp panic. Not a dramatic reaction. Just this quiet, heavy feeling, like something shifted under me. I clicked it. I told myself I was just checking if it was legit. Just confirming it wasn't something weird before I wiped everything. The document opened. Court-stamped. Signed. Dated. Real. And not old enough to feel irrelevant. The date sat there like it belonged in a timeline I thought I already understood. It was finalized about a year before we met. I stared at it longer than I should have, like staring long enough might change what it meant. Because Stephen had always told me he'd never been married. Not in a vague way. Not in a "it didn't work out" way. He was specific. Casual about it, even. I remember one of our early dates. We were sitting in this small restaurant downtown, talking about past relationships like people do when they're figuring each other out. I told him about a long-term boyfriend I almost married. He smiled, shook his head, and said, "I've managed to avoid that level of chaos so far." Avoid. That word came back to me sitting there at the table with his laptop open. I scrolled. There were more emails tied to it. Attachments. Back and forth between attorneys. Settlement details. It wasn't just a single document. It was a whole process. A whole ending. And then I saw her name. Stephanie. Stephanie Carter. My hand actually paused on the trackpad when I read it. For a second, my brain tried to do something weird with it, like maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe it was someone else. Maybe Carter was just a common name. But it didn't feel like that. I clicked into the thread. More attachments. More references to the same case. And then I did the one thing I probably shouldn't have done, but by that point it felt impossible not to. I typed her name into the search bar. Stephanie Carter. The results loaded almost instantly. Emails. Calendar invites. Photos. I clicked on the first photo without really thinking about it. And that's when everything stopped feeling abstract. It was a wedding photo. Not blurry. Not distant. Not something you could explain away. Professional. Bright. Clear. Stephanie in a white dress. Stephen in a suit. Standing close, smiling like people who meant it. There were people behind them, family, friends, faces I didn't recognize. A vineyard in the background, somewhere warm and open, sunlight hitting everything just right. They looked happy. That's the part that got me. Not just that it existed, but that it looked real. I clicked through a few more without meaning to. Different angles. A kiss. A group photo. A reception shot with lights strung up behind them. It wasn't a quick mistake. It wasn't something that felt rushed or forced. It looked like a life. And I had never heard her name before that moment. I closed the laptop. Not gently. Not dramatically either. Just enough to stop seeing it. I sat there for a while, staring at the table like if I focused hard enough on something normal, everything else might settle into place around it. I tried to come up with explanations. Maybe it was brief. Maybe it was complicated. Maybe it was something he didn't count for some reason. But none of that explained why he told me it never happened. That night, I didn't say anything right away. I told myself I wanted to handle it calmly. That I didn't want to jump to conclusions. That there might be something I was missing. But really, I think I just needed time to sit with the feeling of it. Stephen came home like he always does. Same time. Same routine. He walked in, set his keys down, kissed me on the cheek, asked what I wanted for dinner. Normal. Completely normal. And it made everything worse. Because I kept looking at him thinking, you had a whole marriage. A whole person. A whole life before me that you decided I didn't need to know about. We ate dinner. He talked about work. Something about a client and numbers that didn't add up. I nodded in the right places, but I wasn't really there. I kept hearing that word in my head. Avoid. After we finished eating, I stood at the sink for a minute longer than I needed to, just staring at the water running over the dishes. Then I turned it off, dried my hands, and walked into the living room where he was sitting. I sat down across from him and said, as evenly as I could, "Hey. I was setting up your old laptop today." He looked up, distracted but not concerned. "Yeah, I saw some emails," I said. "About a divorce. From before we met." He didn't react right away. It wasn't dramatic. He didn't panic. He didn't look shocked. He just paused. A second too long. And in that second, I knew. Then he said, "Oh. Yeah. That? I remember repeating it without meaning to. That? He rubbed the back of his neck, like he does when he's uncomfortable but trying not to show it. "It wasn't a big deal," he said. "It was quick. We weren't right for each other." I watched him for a second, waiting for more. Waiting for something that made it make sense. "Why did you tell me you'd never been married?" I asked. He shrugged. Actually shrugged. "I didn't think it mattered," he said. "It was over before it really started." Something in me tightened. I kept my voice steady. I saw the photos. That's when he went quiet. Not defensive yet. Just still. Like he was deciding how much of the truth he was willing to give me. And that was the moment everything started to feel different. Not because I had proof, but because I realized I wasn't just asking what happened. I was asking how much of him I didn't know. He stayed quiet for a few seconds after I said I saw the photos. Not confused. Not shocked. Just thinking. Like he was deciding what version of the truth to give me. Then he exhaled and leaned back slightly, like he was settling into something uncomfortable but manageable. "Okay," he said. "Yeah, it lasted longer than I usually say. But it wasn't what you think." That sentence didn't even make sense to me. "What do I think?" I asked. He looked at me, and for a second, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Not guilt exactly. Not even fear. Just calculation. "It wasn't a real marriage," he said. "Not in the way you're making it." I let that sit there between us. "A real marriage?" I repeated. He nodded, like that clarified everything. We rushed into it. It fell apart fast. We were basically done before it even meant anything. "But you stayed married," I said. He hesitated. "Yeah. For how long, Stephen?" He looked away, like the answer was somewhere on the wall instead of right in front of him. "A couple years." There it was again. A couple years. Not weeks. Not months. Years. I felt something shift inside me, like the story I had about him, about us, was quietly rearranging itself into something I didn't recognize. "That's not nothing," I said. "That's a life. That's not something you just skip over." "I didn't skip it," he said, a little sharper now. "I just didn't bring it up. You told me you'd never been married." "That's not the same as lying about something important," he said quickly. "It didn't matter anymore. It wasn't part of my life when I met you." I stared at him. "You decided that," I said. "You decided that something that big just didn't matter enough for me to know." He sighed, like I was making this harder than it needed to be. I didn't want to drag old stuff into something new. I wanted a clean start. A clean start. That phrase landed wrong. "So you just erased it?" I asked. "That's your version of a clean start?" "It wasn't erasing," he said. "It was leaving it where it belonged. In the past." "But it's not just your past," I said. "It's my present. Or at least it should have been." He shook his head, like I was twisting it. "You're making it bigger than it is." That was the moment something inside me snapped, just slightly. "I saw your wedding photos," I said, my voice quieter now, which somehow made it heavier. "You had a full wedding. Family. Friends. A venue. That's not something small, Stephen." He didn't respond right away. "So what?" I asked. "You just woke up one day and decided that version of your life didn't exist anymore?" "It didn't matter," he said again, more firmly this time. "It didn't affect you." I almost laughed at that. "It affects me now," I said. "Because now I'm sitting here wondering what else you've decided doesn't matter enough to tell me." "There is nothing else," he said quickly. Too quickly. I watched him closely. "Are you sure?" He met my eyes, held them this time. "Yes." But something about it felt incomplete. Like he was answering the question I asked, but not the one I meant. I shifted slightly, leaning forward. Why was the divorce finalized so close to when we met? There it was. The question that had been sitting in the back of my mind since I saw the date. He didn't answer right away. Steven, I said. He rubbed his face, exhaling through his nose. Because that's when it was finalized. That's how divorce works. You know that's not what I'm asking. He dropped his hands and looked at me, a little more defensive now. What are you asking, Rebecca? I'm asking how much overlap there was, I said. Between your past and the beginning of us. His jaw tightened. There was an overlap, he said. Not legally, maybe, I said. But emotionally? Practically? Were you still dealing with her when we started dating? I was done with her long before it ended, he said. I told you that. But you didn't tell me anything, I said. That's the point. He stood up then, pacing a little, which he never does. He's usually calm. Controlled. That's part of why I trusted him so easily. You're digging for something that isn't there, he said. You found something from before us, and now you're trying to turn it into a problem in the present. I'm not turning it into anything, I said. You did that when you lied about it. I didn't lie, he snapped. You told me you'd never been married. That was. He stopped, then shook his head. It wasn't relevant. I let out a slow breath. You don't get to decide what's relevant for me, I said. The room went quiet again. He looked tired now. Not guilty. Not apologetic. Just tired, like this conversation was an inconvenience. I'm sorry, he said finally, but it felt more like a way to end the argument than actually address it. Okay. I should have told you. I didn't think it would matter this much. I didn't respond right away. Because I didn't know what to do with that. Not, I was wrong. Not, I lied. Just, I didn't think it would matter. I leaned back into the couch, suddenly feeling exhausted. It matters, I said quietly. Not because you were married. But because you decided I didn't need to know. He didn't say anything. And now I don't know what else you've decided for me, I added. There is nothing else, he said again, softer this time. But the problem was I didn't believe him. Not completely. We didn't resolve anything that night. He ended up sleeping on the couch. I stayed in the bedroom, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my head. Every conversation we'd had about our pasts. Every time he'd brushed something off or kept things vague. I kept thinking about how normal he had been when he walked in that night. How easy it was for him. And how I didn't even know if that version of him was real anymore. The next morning felt off. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Just quiet in a way that didn't belong to us. He made coffee like he always does. Asked if I wanted some. I said yes. We stood in the same kitchen, moving around each other like we always had, except now there was something sitting between us that neither of us knew how to handle. At one point, he looked at me and said, "Are we really going to let this turn into something bigger than it is?" I looked at him and realized something I hadn't wanted to admit yet. It was already bigger. He just didn't feel it the same way I did. I don't know, I said. And that was the most honest answer I had. Because I didn't know if this was something you move past. Or something that slowly ruins everything while you pretend it doesn't. And the worst part was, I wasn't even sure which one he thought it was. The next few days didn't explode the way I thought they would. There were no dramatic fights. No yelling. No big moment where everything finally came out and we either fixed it or ended it. It was quieter than that. Worse, honestly. Steven acted normal. Not fake normal. Not overly careful. Just normal. Like if he stayed consistent enough, I'd eventually settle back into that version of reality with him. He still made coffee in the morning. Still asked about my day. Still talked about work like nothing had shifted. And I tried. I really did. I went to work. I sat at my desk. I answered emails. I scheduled appointments for Dr. Morris. I did everything I was supposed to do. But there was this constant hum in the back of my head that wouldn't shut off. Stephanie Carter. Or Stephanie Young. I couldn't even decide which name bothered me more. At some point during the second day, I caught myself staring at my screen for too long without actually reading anything. Jane noticed. "You okay?" she asked, leaning slightly against the edge of my desk. Jane's a social worker at the clinic. She's the kind of person who picks up on things without you having to say them out loud. "Yeah," I said quickly. "Just tired." She didn't push. Just nodded, but I could tell she didn't fully believe me. I didn't want to talk about it. Not yet. I didn't even know how to explain it without sounding like I was overreacting. Because on paper, it sounds small. He didn't tell me about a past marriage. That's it. But it didn't feel small. It felt like I had been talking to someone for years who had quietly edited out entire chapters of his life and let me build something with the version he chose to show me. By the third day, I couldn't sit with it anymore. Not without knowing more. I didn't want to go through his things again. That line already felt blurry enough. But there was one thing I kept thinking about. If this wasn't some buried, painful secret, if other people knew about it, then why didn't I? That question wouldn't leave me alone. So during my lunch break, I sat in my car in the parking lot, staring at my phone longer than I should have, trying to decide if I was about to make things worse. Then I searched a name. Kevin Green. I remembered Steven mentioning him before. Someone he used to work with before we met. It wasn't a close friendship, more like one of those casual connections that comes up in stories. But it was enough. Enough that it wouldn't feel completely random if I reached out. My fingers hovered over the screen for a second before I typed. Hey, this is Rebecca, Steven's wife. Quick question, did Steven ever mention being married before me? I stared at the message for a full minute before sending it. Once it was out there, I immediately felt like I'd crossed another line. But it was too late to take it back. The reply came faster than I expected. Yeah, to Stephanie, right? That was it. No confusion. No hesitation. No, what are you talking about? Just confirmation. My stomach dropped in a completely different way this time. Not shock. Not confusion. Just clarity. I typed back before I could overthink it. How long were they married? A few seconds passed. Then, couple years, I think. Why? I didn't respond right away. Because that why sat there heavier than anything else. Why didn't I know? Why was I the only person in his life who didn't know? I locked my phone and leaned back in my seat, staring at the roof of my car like I needed something solid to focus on. It wasn't a secret. That's what kept echoing in my head. It wasn't some buried, shameful thing he hid from everyone. People knew. Casually. Like it was just part of his life story. Which meant he didn't forget to tell me. He chose not to. That distinction hit harder than anything else. That night, I didn't bring it up right away. I wanted to see him again. Watch him. See if anything felt different now that I knew more. He came home, same as always. Hey, he said, setting his keys down. How was work? Fine, I said. I watched him move around the kitchen like I had seen him do 100 times before. Comfortable. Familiar. And suddenly, that familiarity didn't feel as solid as it used to. At one point, he glanced at me and said, "You're quiet." I talked to Kevin today, I said. That got his attention. He stopped mid-motion and looked at me. About what? About you. His expression shifted, just slightly. What did you ask him, he said. I held his gaze. If you were married before. A pause. Then, Rebecca. He answered really fast, I said. Like it wasn't a question. Like it was obvious. He exhaled slowly, setting whatever he was holding down on the counter. Why would you do that, he asked. Because I needed to know if this was something you hid from everyone or just from me. He didn't respond right away. And that silence told me everything. It wasn't like that, he said finally. It feels exactly like that, I said. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing a little again. I didn't think it mattered to anyone anymore. But it mattered enough that people remember it, I said. It mattered enough that Kevin didn't even question it. That doesn't mean anything, he said. It means I'm the only one who didn't know, I said. That landed. I saw it in the way he looked at me. That's not fair, he said, but there wasn't much weight behind it. Fair? I repeated. You built an entire relationship with me and just left that part out. That's not fair. He didn't argue that. Instead, he said, I didn't want you to see me differently. And for the first time, that sounded closer to the truth than anything else he'd said. I studied him for a second. But you didn't give me a choice, I said. He didn't answer. And now I don't know what else you've decided for me, I added. There is nothing else, he said again. But now that I knew this wasn't some buried secret, now that I knew it was just something he chose not to tell me, that sentence didn't mean what it used to. It didn't sound reassuring. It sounded selective. Like nothing else meant nothing else he thought I needed to know. And that scared me more than the marriage itself. Because I realized this wasn't just about his past. It was about how he decided what version of the truth I was allowed to have. And once that thought settled in, I couldn't shake it. Not at work. Not at home. Not even when things were quiet. Especially not when things were quiet. By the fourth day, it stopped feeling like a discovery and started feeling like something I was living inside. Not loud. Not chaotic. Just constant. Steven kept trying to smooth things over without actually touching the problem. He was softer with me. More attentive. Asking if I wanted dinner, offering to pick things up, checking in more than usual. But every time he did, it felt like he was trying to fix the mood instead of the truth. And the truth was still sitting there untouched. That night, I couldn't take the quiet anymore. We were sitting in the living room, the TV on but neither of us watching it. It had been like that for almost an hour. Just background noise filling space neither of us wanted to step into. I muted it. Steven looked over. What? I didn't ease into it this time. I want the full timeline, I said. He blinked like he needed a second to catch up. What do you mean? I mean I want to know when it started, when it ended, and exactly where I fit into that, I said. No vague answers. No, it didn't matter. Just the truth. He leaned back slowly, exhaling. Rebecca, we've already talked about this. No, I said. You've talked around it. That landed. He rubbed his hands together like he was buying time. It ended before you and I started. That's not what I asked. He looked at me, a little sharper now. What do you want me to say? I want you to tell me when you separated from her, I said. Not when the divorce was finalized. When you were actually done. A pause. Then, about 6 months before we met. That answer came too clean. Too ready. And during those 6 months? I asked. I was moving on, he said. Figuring things out. Were you still living together? No. Were you still talking? He hesitated. Steven. Occasionally, he admitted. Logistics. Finalizing things. I held his gaze. So she was still in your life? Technically, yes, he said. But it wasn't like that. That's not the point, I said. The point is you started something with me while you were still tied to her. I wasn't tied to her, he said, frustration creeping in. It was over. But not finished, I said. He didn't respond. And that silence filled in the answer. I sat back, letting that settle. So when we had those conversations early on, I said slowly, when we talked about our pasts, when you told me you'd never been married, you were already carrying all of that. He looked away. I didn't think it would matter, he said again, quieter this time. That phrase again. It hit differently now. Not dismissive. Not defensive. Just revealing. You keep saying that, I said. Like it explains something. But it doesn't. It just tells me how you decide what I deserve to know. He shook his head. That's not what I'm doing. It is, I said. You decided your marriage didn't matter. You decided the timeline didn't matter. You decided I didn't need that information to make my own choices. He stood up, pacing again. I didn't want to complicate things. You didn't want to risk me walking away, I said. That stopped him. He looked at me, really looked this time. I didn't want to lose something good because of something that was already over, he said. And there it was. The first honest thing that actually connected. I let out a slow breath. So you made that decision for me. I made the decision to move forward, he said. With half the truth. With what mattered, he corrected. I stared at him. Do you hear yourself? I asked. He didn't answer. You're still doing it, I said. You're still deciding what matters and what doesn't, like that's your call. He ran his hand through his hair again, frustration building. What do you want from me, Rebecca? I've apologized. I've explained it. I can't change what happened. I'm not asking you to change it, I said. I'm asking you to actually acknowledge what you did. I did acknowledge it, he said. No, I said. You minimized it. You reframed it. You reduced it to something small so it wouldn't feel like a lie. That's not fair, he said. What's not fair is sitting here wondering if the version of you I married is even real, I said. That landed harder than anything else. The room went quiet again. And for the first time, he didn't immediately push back. He just stood there. Then, after a few seconds, he said, It's still me. That sentence. It should have been comforting. It wasn't. Is it? I asked. He frowned. What does that mean? It means I don't know where the line is anymore, I said. Between what's real and what you've decided to leave out. I didn't leave out everything, he said. But you left out something big, I said. Big enough that it changes how I see everything else. He didn't respond. And I realized something in that moment. This wasn't about catching him in another lie. This wasn't about uncovering some bigger secret. It was about trust. And how easily he could shape the truth to fit what he wanted. I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of it settle in a way it hadn't before. Did you ever think about telling me? I asked. He hesitated. At the beginning, maybe. What stopped you? He didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, time. I let that sit there. You mean the longer you didn't say it, the harder it got? I asked. He nodded slightly. So you just kept going, I said. I didn't think it would come up, he said. I almost smiled at that. Not because it was funny. Because it was unbelievable. You didn't think your marriage would come up? I said. He didn't have an answer. And that was the moment something in me shifted for real. Not anger. Not shock. Just clarity. Because I realized this wasn't a one-time decision. It wasn't one lie. It was a series of choices. Every conversation where he didn't mention it. Every moment he let me believe something that wasn't true. Every time he decided silence was easier than honesty. And he was still doing it. Even now. Trying to make it smaller. Trying to make it manageable. Trying to keep it from becoming something that might cost him everything. I looked at him for a long second. Then I said, I don't know if I can trust you the same way again. He didn't argue. Didn't defend himself. Just stood there, like he understood exactly what that meant. And for the first time since all of this started, I wasn't confused. I wasn't trying to figure it out. I just knew one thing. Something fundamental had changed. And I didn't know if it could be put back the way it was. The next morning felt different. Not tense. Not heavy in the same way as the days before. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after something has already broken, and both people know it, even if no one says it out loud. Steven was already up when I walked into the kitchen. Coffee was made. 2 mugs on the counter, like always. Routine. He looked at me and said, Morning. And I realized something in that moment. He was still trying to keep us in the version of normal where this eventually fades. Like if we just kept moving forward, it would settle into something small. But it didn't feel small to me. Morning, I said, but my voice didn't match his. We stood there for a second, both holding on to something neither of us knew how to fix. Then he said, I've been thinking. I didn't respond. Just waited. I handled it wrong, he said. I should have told you. I know that. I nodded once. Okay, that was it. Not because I didn't hear him. Not because I didn't appreciate it. But because it wasn't new. It wasn't something I hadn't already figured out on my own. He stepped a little closer. I just didn't want to lose you over something that didn't matter anymore. There it was again. Didn't matter. I let out a slow breath. It mattered enough for you to hide it. He didn't argue that. I wasn't hiding it, he said instead, softer. I was leaving it behind. And you didn't think I deserved to know what you were leaving behind? I asked. He looked at me, like he wanted to say yes, but knew he couldn't. I didn't think it would change anything, he said. I held his gaze. It does, I said. That was the part he still didn't fully understand. To him, nothing about our day-to-day life had changed. I was still here. The house was still ours. We were still us. But for me, something underneath all of that had shifted. Not shattered. Not destroyed. Just moved. Like a foundation that wasn't as solid as I thought it was. I don't know how to go back to how it felt before, I said. You don't have to go back, he said quickly. We can move forward. With what? I asked. Because right now, I don't even know where the line is anymore. There is no line, he said. There's just us. That sounded good. Simple. Reassuring. And completely wrong. There is a line, I said. It's the difference between what you tell me and what you decide I don't need to know. He didn't answer. Because there wasn't a way to argue that without proving my point. I picked up my coffee, but I didn't drink it. I need space, I said. He blinked. Space. Just a few days, I said. To think without this feeling sitting in the middle of everything. He looked like he wanted to push back. To say something that would keep me there. But he didn't. Okay, he said finally. That was the first time since this started that he didn't try to manage the situation. And somehow, that made it easier to breathe. I stayed with Patricia for a few days. She didn't ask too many questions at first. Just let me exist in the space, let Amy talk about school, let normal things happen around me while I tried to sort through everything in my head. At one point, Patricia asked, is it something he did or something he didn't tell you? I remember looking at her and saying, both. Because that's what it was. It wasn't the marriage. It was the choice to remove it. To edit it. To build something new with me and decide I didn't need the full version of him. And the more I sat with that, the clearer it became. This wasn't about the past. It was about how he handled the truth. I went back home on the 4th day. Not because everything felt resolved, but because I had reached a point where I understood what I needed. Stephen was sitting on the couch when I walked in. He stood up immediately. Hey, he said. Hey. We stood there for a second, like we were figuring out how to exist in the same space again. Then I said, I've been thinking too. He nodded. Yeah, I don't think you're a bad person, I said. Relief flickered across his face, just for a second. But I think you made a choice, I continued. And then you kept making that same choice over and over again. He didn't interrupt. You didn't just lie once, I said. You maintained it. You lived in it. You let me build something on top of it. I know, he said quietly. And I don't know if I can just ignore that, I said. You don't have to ignore it, he said. We can work through it. I nodded slightly. Maybe. That word hung there. Maybe. Because that was the truth. I wasn't sure. Not in a dramatic, everything is ending way. But in a quieter, more complicated way. The kind where you realize something fundamental has changed, and you don't know if time fixes it or just makes you better at living with it. We didn't make a big decision that night. No ultimatums. No clear ending. Just space between us that didn't used to be there. It's been a few weeks now. We're still together. Technically. We talk. We function. We exist in the same routines we always have. But it's different. I notice things now. Not suspicious things. Just gaps. Moments where I wonder if this is the full story or just the version he thinks I need. And I don't know how long you can live like that before it either fades or becomes the only thing you can see. He keeps saying, nothing's changed. But it has. For me, it has. And I don't know if that's something you eventually move past. Or something that slowly changes how you see everything. And the worst part? I don't think he'll ever understand why this changed everything. Because to him, it was never real enough to matter. So I guess that's where I'm at. Not leaving. Not fully staying either. Just trying to figure out if this is something people come back from. Or if this is the kind of quiet lie that never really goes away. Would you stay?